Hello dear friends, assalamu alaikum and welcome back. Friends, we are discussing about the connective tissues of the body. So previous lectures was about the composition of the connective tissue, right? So how, let's see a little bit. You know, connective tissue is composed of three important components. We have already discussed the fibers are there in connective tissue. Yes, then there are the ground substance, and then there are the cells present in the connective tissue. Yes, we have discussed. The fibers are of three types and we discussed all of them in detail. The collagen fiber, the elastic fibers and the reticular fibers. They are present in connective tissue. These three important types of fibers are found in connective tissue. Then the ground substance was composed of three important factors, you know, the GAGs, glycosamine glycans, the proteoglycans and the glycoproteins. We have discussed about them. And the cells are of two types. One were the permanent cells and other were the wandering cells or the transient cells or the visiting cells or the guest cells. So the permanent cells we discussed were osteocytes, osteoblasts, chondroblasts, chondrocytes, reticulocytes, endothelial cells, pericytes, and then we also discussed the endothelial cells, the mast cells, the adipocytes. We have discussed all of them, right? And the wandering cells, you know, are the visiting cells, so macrophages, macrophages, eosinophils, basophils, monocytes, lymphocytes. These cells were the wandering cells or the visiting cells of the connective tissue. Now, we discussed about the composition of connective tissue in our previous lectures, right? Now here we are going to classify the connective tissue in this lecture. So this lecture is about classification of connective tissue, right? Now we will classify connective tissue and then we will go and discuss each of the connective tissue and their structure. Right, so let us go in detail classification of the connective tissue. Now in our body we have different types of connective tissues, and what are those? First of all, the connective tissues of the human body, right, are divided into two major classes. Connective tissue are divided into how many major classes? The two major classes of connective tissue. One is the embryonic tissue. Embryonic connective tissue, right? So why? Because why it's called embryonic tissue? Because this type of tissue is found during embryonic life. That's why we call it embryonic connective tissue, very simply. And the other type of tissue which is right now present all over in my body, that is called the adult tissue. Adult connective tissue. Be with me. Inshallah, at the end of the lecture you will learn all the classification of connective tissue very easily. So there is embryonic connective tissue, there is adult connective tissue. Embryonic connective tissue is present during embryonic life, during developmental life, and adult connective tissue is present right now in our body, right? The question is that, is this tissue still present in the body? Yes, this is present in the body, but it is not developing anymore. It has done his duty, but he is calm now. He is sitting very silently in our body now, and these tissues are working in our body, right? So these cells are also present in the body right now in my body, but they are non-functional right now, and they are functional tissues. They are the functional connective tissue. So embryonic tissue, embryonic connective tissue is divided into two classes, right? Embryonic connective tissue is divided into two classes, and what are those? Those are the mesenchymes, or we say mesenchymal connective tissue, mesenchymal, right? And I will tell you the detail. And then there is the mucous connective tissue. Mucus. Now look carefully. Mesenchymal connective tissue contains all the mesenchymal cells. You know, there was the mesoderm. So this type of tissue, this mesenchymal embryonic connective tissue is present in the mesoderm, right? You know, during development the embryo becomes zygote develops into different developmental stages, the 2-cell stage, the 4-cell stage, the 8-cell stage, and then their morula, and then blastocyst and blastocyst and bilaminar disc, trilaminar disc. So in the trilaminar disc, you know, the cells were arranged in 3 layers. For example, this is the ectoderm, this is then the endodermal cells, and then these are the mesodermal cells. So this is mesoderm, and you know, these were the 3 layers of cells. So we say this is called the trilaminar disc, right? In this trilaminar disc, what is this? This is the mesoderm, and we knew from the lecture, from the cells of the connective tissue, we know that these mesodermal cells or this mesoderm will give rise to the cells of the connective tissue. That's why we say that this is the embryonic age, this is the embryonic life, and in this life the tissue which is present is called embryonic connective tissue, and all these cells are called mesenchymal embryonic connective tissue, and they are present in the mesoderm, right? So this is, and then there are mucus type of embryonic connective tissue which is present mostly in the embryonic cord, right? And we say that they are very loosely attached. These are very loose embryonic connective tissue. The cells are not too much close to each other. They contain lots of fibers and fluid-like substances. So they are called there as the Wharton's jelly. Wharton's jelly. So the example of mucus embryonic connective tissue is the Wharton's jelly, right? And it is present in the cord of the baby, the placental cord, right? So this we did the classification. Connective tissue is of 2 types: embryonic connective tissue, adult connective tissue. Embryonic connective tissue in our body was of 2 types: the mesenchymal embryonic connective tissue and the mucus embryonic connective tissue. The adult connective tissue in our body is divided into 3 major classes, right? And what are those 3 major classes? Those are the loose connective tissue, right? Let me write here the loose connective tissue, the dense connective tissue, the dense, and the specialized connective tissue. Specialized connective tissue, right friends? Once again, adult connective tissue is divided into 3 classes: loose connective tissue, dense connective tissue, and specialized connective tissue. Now about the loose connective tissue, this tissue is divided into 2 classes. Very easily, we are learning it, enjoying it, and we want to learn it conceptually. So the loose connective tissue is divided into 2 classes. And what are those classes? There is the areolar tissue, areolar connective tissue, right? And then there is the adipose connective tissue. Okay, that's so simple. Once again, adult connective tissue divided into loose connective tissue, dense connective tissue, and specialized tissue. The loose connective tissue is divided into areolar tissue and adipose tissue, and we will have separate lectures on all of them, don't worry, right? Then let's come to the dense connective tissue. The dense connective tissue is also divided into 2 major classes. And what are those? Those are the 2 major classes of dense connective tissue are the dense regular and dense irregular. So the dense regular connective tissue and dense irregular connective tissue. Dense irregular, right? Let me make a little bit difference between loose and dense connective tissue. Let's come here. For example, if this is a piece of loose connective tissue and here is a piece of dense connective tissue. What is the difference between loose and dense? Very easily, look here. In loose connective tissue we have more cells. Loose connective tissue we have more cells and less fibers. I want to clear, in loose connective tissue we have more cells but less number of fibers. In dense connective tissue we have less number of cells, right, and more fibers are there. We have less number of cells and more fibers. So due to the presence of more and lots of fibers, this tissue is called the dense tissue, right? So it's quite simple. So here less fibers in loose connective tissue, and in dense connective tissue there are more fibers. Done. Here in loose connective tissue more cells, here in dense connective tissue less cells. That's quite simple, right? So more collagen fibers, mostly collagen fibers. So there are more collagen fibers in dense connective tissue and less collagen fibers in loose connective tissue. Dense connective tissue is divided into regular and irregular. And what is the difference between regular and irregular? Look, this is a piece of regular dense connective tissue and this is a piece of irregular dense connective tissue. So in regular dense connective tissue, the fibers are arranged in a regular pattern. What did I say? I said that in dense regular connective tissue, right, the fibers have a regular pattern of arrangement. That's why we call it regular dense connective tissue. That's so simple, right? And in case of irregular dense connective tissue, there are much fibers but they are arranged in irregular manner. Fibers are very much present but they are arranged in irregular manner. That's why we call it irregular dense connective tissue. Now look with the difference between both of them. So in regular connective tissue, regular dense connective tissue, the fibers are very dense but have a very specialized arrangement. In irregular dense connective tissue, the fibers are very much but they have irregular type of arrangement. Right. So regular connective tissue and irregular connective tissue. Now in case we say that the regular connective tissue is further divided into two types. Regular dense connective tissue is further classified into two types. And what are those two types? Very easily, the white fibrous and the yellow elastic. White fibrous. White fibrous regular dense connective tissue and the yellow elastic. Yellow elastic. That's quite simple. So the white fibrous means that it is appearing a little bit white in color and it is fibrous, so it means that it has lots of fibers in it. It is very strong. But look here, yellow elastic. So it's a little bit elastic. It does not contain lots of fibers. It is dense but less dense than this fibrous tissue, right? So regular fibrous, we say regular dense connective tissue is divided into white fibrous and yellow elastic, right? Now this white fibrous tissue is divided into two types. White fibrous is divided into how many types? It is divided into two types. Very simply, the first one is the cord shape, cord form, and the other one is sheet form. Sheet form. Now look, let me make a diagram here. For example, this is a dense connective tissue, right? This is a dense regular connective tissue. Now it has lots of fibers in it and it is arranged in a cord shape. That's why we call it cord white fibrous regular dense connective tissue, right, like this. That's a cord shape. And what about sheet form? So sheet form is in the form of large sheets, right, like this. like this, right? So the difference between cord shape and sheet shape, now you know the difference. Okay, what are the examples of these cord shape wide fibrous? So the example of them are the tendons. Tendons are the examples, and here the aponeurosis are the examples of this aponeurosis, right? Let me make here the aponeurosis, right? And aponeurosis are present in sheet form, right? Okay, they are also called, these cord and sheets are also called the collagenous and elastic. So these sheet type of wide fibrous tissues are a little bit elastic in nature, right? Or we just say, let me write it there, not here, I will write it there. These white fibrous are called the collagenous and the yellow elastic are called the elastic. So the regular connective tissue, we can also say that the regular dense connective tissue is divided into two types, the collagenous and the elastic. Collagenous means it contains lots of collagen fibers. When it contains lots of collagen fibers, it must be fibrous. And elastic means it contains less collagen fibers, so that's why it is little bit elastic in nature, right friends? Let's come once again. We say that adult connective tissue is divided into three types: the loose, the dense and the specialized. The loose is divided into areolar tissue and adipose tissues, right? The dense connective tissue is divided into regular dense and irregular dense. The regular dense is divided into collagenous and elastic. Collagenous is also known as white fibrous. Elastic is also known as yellow elastic. The white fibrous tissue is, we can find them in our body in two forms, in cord form and in sheet form. In cord form, the examples of are tendons. So tendons are the examples of white fibrous regular dense connective tissue. Once again, tendons are the examples of white fibrous regular dense connective tissue. That's simple. And then what about yellow elastic? So the yellow elastic are also divided into two types. Yellow elastic, my dear friends, are also divided into two types. And what are those? Again we will write the cord shape and the sheet form. They are present in cord form and sheet form. And in cord form, the examples of these yellow elastic are the ligaments. Ligaments, right? So ligaments are the examples of cord, yellow elastic, regular dense connective tissue. I hope you understand about the classification of the regular dense connective tissue. Now irregular dense connective tissue are present in many areas of the body, and we will see them, don't worry, in the next coming lectures. Okay, now let's come to specialized connective tissue. The specialized connective tissue in our body has been classified into four classes. How many classes? Four classes, very easily. And what are those and what are their names? I will tell you right now. Look, the first one are the skeletal, right? We say the first one are the skeletal, right? Specialized, adult specialized connective tissue may be the skeletal, they may be the vascular. I will give examples of each. They may be reticular, right? They may be reticular, and they may also be pigmented. Look carefully. Specialized connective tissue in our body is divided into skeletal, vascular, reticular and pigmented, right? Let's carry them. The skeletal connective tissue is divided into two classes. You know, in our skeletal system we have bones and we have cartilages attached to them, right? So we say that the skeletal specialized connective tissue is divided into two classes: the bones, right? Bone is the hardest connective tissue, and the cartilage. Now I hope it is clear. So skeletal connective tissue is divided into two classes, the bones and the cartilages. And my dear friends, we know that the bones are of two types. How many types of bones we have in our body? We have hard bones and soft bones, or we also say that we have compact bone, and we have spongy bone. So bone connective tissue is divided into compact bone connective tissue and spongy bone connective tissue. And you know, if I draw here a diagram, a very simplified diagram, this is for example a bone, right? And you know, this is the proximal epiphysis, and this is the distal epiphysis, and this is the diaphysis, I mean shaft of the bone. This is diaphysis and these are the epiphysis. And my dear friends, we know that in these epiphyses the bone is soft bone or spongy bone, we say spongy bone. And here in the diaphysis, this is a compact bone, or we say this is hard bone, hard or compact bone, right? So bone tissue is divided into hard bone and soft bone. So we also write here compact bone means hard bone and spongy bone means soft bone, right? So skeletal connective tissue is divided into bone and cartilage. Bone is of two types, compact bone and spongy bone, and cartilage is of three types. In our body we have how many types of cartilages? We have three types of cartilage, very simply, and I will discuss each type of cartilage in detail in the next coming lectures. And what are those? Those are the elastic cartilage. We have in our body elastic cartilage, we have hyaline cartilage, and we have fibrous cartilage. Now we will discuss three of them. Fibrous. So cartilage is divided into elastic cartilage, hyaline cartilage and fibrous cartilage. We will see three of them in the next lectures, right? So this is about skeletal connective tissue. So skeletal connective tissue is divided into bones and cartilage. Bones are divided into compact and spongy. Cartilage is divided into hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage and fibrous cartilage. Done. Now let's come to vascular connective tissue. Vascular connective tissue means that this type of connective tissue is present in your vessels, right? And in your vessel, you know, we have fluids like substances. So vascular connective tissue is also known as fluid connective tissue. Fluid connective tissue, that's quite simple. Now the fluid connective tissue is divided into two classes. Fluid connective tissue is divided into how many classes? Two classes. Very simply, the blood, right? In our vessels we have blood, and there are certain specialized vessels in which there are lymph fluids. So the lymph is also a connective tissue. So we say that the vascular connective tissue or fluid connective tissue in our body, we have that the blood and the lymph. So we will have lectures on the blood, we will have lectures on the lymph also, right friends? And then there are the reticular and pigmented connective tissue, and we will see also the reticular and pigmented connective tissue will also be discussed. So my dear friends, this was the whole classification of the connective tissue. Let's fastly repeat them. The connective tissue in our body is divided into two classes. The first one, the embryonic connective tissue. The second one is the specialized or adult connective tissue, right? Embryonic connective tissue is the type of connective tissue which is present during embryonic life, and that is divided into two classes. The first class is the mesenchymal connective tissue, and the second one is the mucous connective tissue. Mesenchymal connective tissue is present in the mesoderm, and mucous connective tissue is the examples of it is the Wharton's jelly, which is present in the cord of the connecting tube between the baby and the mother, right? Okay. The adult connective tissue is divided into three classes: the loose connective tissue, the dense connective tissue and the specialized connective tissue. Okay, the loose connective tissue is divided into two classes. The first one, areolar connective tissue, the second one, adipose tissue. Okay, Then there is the dense connective tissue. The dense connective tissue is divided into two classes: dense regular, dense irregular, right? Then dense regular was divided into two classes, right? We say that there is the collagenous and elastic. So yes, collagenous and elastic, or we say white fibrous or yellow elastic. The white fibrous is divided into two classes: the cord shaped white fibrous and the sheet shaped white fibrous, examples of which are tendon and aponeurosis. Then the elastic or yellow elastic connective tissue was also divided into two classes: the cord and sheet, so examples of which are ligaments. Okay. Then irregular connective tissue, we leave there. Specialized connective tissue in our body is classified into four classes: the skeletal, the vascular, the reticular, and then there was the pigmented one, right? The skeletal connective tissue was divided into two classes: the bone and the cartilage. Bone was divided into two types: compact bone and a soft bone, or we say hard bone and soft bone, and we showed the examples, the locations of them also. Then there was cartilage. Cartilage was classified into three classes: elastic cartilage, hyaline cartilage, and fibrous cartilage. We will have lectures on them. Then the vascular tissue was also called the fluid connective tissue, and it is divided into two classes: the blood and the lymph. We will have lectures on blood, we will have lectures on lymph, and then we will also give you examples of reticular and pigmented connective tissue. So my dear friends, that's all about the classification of connective tissue. Inshallah, in the next coming lecture we will start discussing each of them. For example, we will discuss cartilage, we will discuss bone, we will discuss blood, lymph, and all of them. We will discuss ligaments and tendons. All of them we will discuss, inshallah. See you guys in the next lecture. Till then, Allah Hafiz.